Tripoli, Libya. The Sun, a molten brass disc, blazed eye, spilling UTS inferno over every rooftop. The city pulsed a symphony of commerce, shocked traffic, and en under cure of palpable tension. Here, the call to prayer drifted through the air 5 times a day, a constant reminder of face. Yet, in this vibrant, volatile place, even a whisper about Christianity could summon a chilling knock at the door. But deep beneath one forgotten street, in a district known as Abu Salim, face still dared to draw breath. In the crumbling basement of an unscript house, hidden behind a false wall and down a narrow, treacherous staircase, a single barre bulb cast a mige light. That morning, 17 people gathered in a silence so profound it was almost sacred. Their face, ordinary in their feature, were etched with a quiet, indéniable courage. There was Mariam, her knees ashing from the 2 kilometers she walked each day just to be there. There was Isef, a young medical student, whose parents believed he was diligently studying in the city library. And there was the Mansour family, 4 small children clutching rosary carved from olive wood, there I marry mere breeze whisper, too soft to ever draw suspicion. At the center of them all stood Father Butroana, 60 years old, his face a map of desert wind and the slow, patient erosion of prayer. I adjusted his simple white stole and gazed around the tiny, enclosed space, et saw not fear, but fierce fidelity. It was Sunday, 11h30 in the morning. The air in the basement emptied a heavy blend of incense, dust, and raw adrenaline. Every strange cook from one attendait caused odor to flinch. Every muffled sound from the street above felt amplifié, a stark, constant reminder dead discovery could mean imprisonment, or far worse. Yet, in that shared vulnerability, not one of them spoke of danger. They were there for something eternal. Butro lifted the chalice with exquisite care, the way a man might handle his very last, most fragile hope. H.I.S. voice, low yet unwavering, resonated through the room, take this, all of you, and eat of it. For a brief, transcendent moment, the outside world simply ceased to exist. There was no militia, no encroaching fear, only the sacred word echoing of cold concrete walls. Then, it came. A sound. So sharp, so sudden, it sliced through the ancient liturgy like a knife. The crash of heavy boots on metal stair. Head whipped around. Heart seized in their chest. The door upstairs slammed open, violently. A guttural shout in Arabic ripped through the air. The single bulb flickered, then dimmed. Isef froze mid-prayer. Mariam clutched her rosary so tightly a bead snapped, scattering across the floor. The Mansour children melted behind their mother's skirt, tiny figure of terror. Father Butro, still holding the consecrated host between his palms, looked up just as the first soldier burst into the doorway, rifle raised, face obscured by a scarf, breath heavy with adrenaline and menace. Chaos erupted in mere second. These were not government soldiers. Their mismatched camouflage, cheap boots, and crudely fashion insignia immediately marked them a militia just another brutal faction in a nation tragically splintered by war. One man tore the crucifix from the wall, spat on it, and then savagely smashed it under his heel. Another kicked over the small, makeshift altar, sending the precious wine spilling across the dusty floor. The leader, a tall, imposing man with a stark black beard and a jagged scar that sliced down his left cheek, strode forward. He pressed the cold barrel of his rifle against the priest's chest. No one screamed. The terror was too complete, too sudden, too absolute. It froze the very air for a single, agonizing heartbeat. The room unsuspended, poised precariously between heaven and hell. The sacred bread still rested in the priest's trembling hand, the hallowed word unfinished. Then came the chilling command, take him. 2 men seized Butro by the arms. The old priest offered no resistance. H.I.S. eyes remained fixed on the shattered crucifix as he was rudely dragged up the stair. Behind him, the faithful wept in silent agony, their prayer swallowed whole by the brutal sounds of boots and screamed order. Outside, the indifferent sun burned blinding white over Tripoli. The door of a white Toyota truck slammed shut with an indifferent, merciless thud. The priest was shoved inside, his wrist bound, a suffocating black hood yanked over his head. Somewhere above the engine's rising roar, the final, sacred word of the master echoed in his mind, for this is my body which will be given up for you. He did not yet know that those words would soon become chillingly literal. He could not conceive that before 11 days passed, the very man who ordered his death would kneel in desperate tears before a glowing piece of bread, begging God for mercy. The truck jolted violently forward, tears crashing over the broken asphalt. Inside the covered bed, Father Buttrot fought desperately for her beneath the hood. The heat built with terrifying speed, clinging to his skin, turning every breath into a searing fire. Outside, men barked order, guns clanked, engines idled. Tripoli blurred into a disorienting maze of turn. He tried to count them. Right, left, right again en instinct of survival, en all from a lifetime of priests who had learned to move like ghosts through hostile streets. But soon, direction dissolved into a dizzying nausea. The voices of his captor blended into a single, harsh, hurrier, triumphant Arabic roar. No one had struck him yet. But the chilling silence between their command was far worse, it carried the crushing weight of what was coming. When the truck finally shuddered to a halt, Rogan yanked him upright by the shoulder. The hood was ripped off. Daylight assaulted his eyes like a physical weapon. They stood in the desolate yard of an old government compound, half ruined by years of relentless war. The walls were the color of ash. Bullet hole pocket the concrete like a violent alphabet. He saw the leader against man with the scar. His eyes were black, sharp, and utterly empty. Bring him inside, he commanded. Buttrot was marched through a narrow hallway that reeked of sweat and rust. The floor was wet, Tug and dared not imagine with what. A day passed, Tin, trembling, filthy and reached out from other cells, silently pleading for water, for mercy, for a sliver of hope. He was violently shoved into a small room, perhaps 2 metres wide, 3 metres long. The door slammed, and the TS echo swallowed everything. A single, naked bulb from the ceiling, buzzing ominously. The air smelled of iron and decay. He stumbled to his knees, gasping, then pressed his forehead against the cold, unyielding wall. Somewhere deep within the building, a scream rose, raw and visceral, only to be abruptly cut short by a dull, sickening thud. For the first time since the raid, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Into your hand, Lord." Hours passed, or perhaps days, he could no longer tell. Bread, hard as stone, arrived through a slot at the bottom of the door. Cloudy, warm water followed. No word, no face, only the scrap of boots fading down the corridor. Et began counting seconds by the flicker of the buzzing bulb. When exhaustion finally claimed him, it wasn't a sleep, it was a deeper, profound surrender. In the darkness behind his eyelid, he saw the mass, frozen mid-air toast suspended between his hands, the terrified eyes of the children, the crucifix breaking under a soul DSL. He tried not to hate them. Death, he knew, would be the first victory the darkness demanded. Outside, the desert wind swept against the cracked walls, carrying the faint, indifferent echo of a city that had utterly forgotten him. Somewhere beyond those walls, his parishioner Mariam, Isef, the Mansour family were scattered, arrested, or worse. But within that suffocating, oppressive space, a small, defiant bestie glowed. Fate, even when corny, does not die quietly. The iron door closed shut behind him with a chilling sound of finality, echoing until it faded into the relentless hum of the bulb above. The room was so small he could touch both walls with outstretched arms. The ceiling dripped slowly, each drop marking the relentless passage of time like a cruel metronome. Buttrot sank to the floor, his back pressing against the cold concrete. The air was thick, damp, and tinged with the unmistakable odor of raw. A rusty bucket in the corner stood a stark testament to what his captor thought of human dignity. On the floor, a thin, grey mat, stand and older than the war itself, lay waiting like an insult. He tried to pray, but even prayer felt different here. The word didn't arise, they clung to the ceiling, then slid back down like condensation. Every few hours, a scream tore through the corridor. Something a man, something a woman, something a sound sorrow it seemed to belong to no species known to man. Between the scream, there was silence a silence that waked, pressed, and utterly suffocated. Bread arrived twice a day, flat, dry, utterly flavorless. A small cup of cloudy water followed, passed through the slit at the bottom of the door. No voice, no eyes, just the scrap of metal on metal. On what a guest was the second night, a terrible réalisation struck him, et no longer knew if it was night at all. The light never went off. The bulb buzzed endlessly, casting a sickly yellow pall over everything. Et could no longer measure time by shadow or down. Et began counting mil instead of days. After the fourth piece of bread, his body trembled constantly, sweat and fear mingled until he couldn't tell which stung his eyes more. That was when the hallucination began, or perhaps they were merely hyper-vivid memory. He saw the small church in Benghazi where he had first been ordained, UTS stained glass shattered years ago by gunfire. He saw the face of the children he had baptized, now adults scattered by the merciless civil war. He saw his mother, her uncovered in flour, whispering a prayer for a reckless son, who had chosen danger over comfort. Be with a serpent, she had once told him, be gentle a dove. He had managed the gentleness, wisdom had always been hardy. He smiled at the memory, two his lips were cracked and dry. Then, almost unconsciously, he began to pray, not alou, buin a silent rhythm traced by his finger. A decade of the rosary, marked by touch alone, his thumb for the cross, his knuckle for each silent I Mary. Without realizing it, he slipped into a desperate routine. When the guard passed, he froze. When they were gone, he prayed. When the scream started again, he whispered the creed loudly, if his word could somehow build walls stronger than concrete. Slowly, imperceptibly, something began to shift inside him. The fear didn't vanish, but it changed shape, like metal melting and being newly forged. The crushing loneliness, too, began to lose its sharp edge. He found a strange, unexpected comfort in repetition, in the stark predictability of pain, in the audacious idea that God could still exist in place built expressly to deny him. By what he guessed was the third day, his voice had gone hoarse from the prolonged silence. He looked once, softly, a hollow, startling sound, realizing he hadn't spoken a single word to another soul since being thrown inside. The sound startled him. It felt as if it belonged to someone else. Then came footsteps in the corridor, slow, deliberate, purposeful. He rose to his knees, half expecting another tray of bread, but the footsteps stopped directly at his door. The heavy lock turned, and for the first time, someone spoke his name. The lock scraped metal against metal, and the door swung open, a blinding rectangle. Light from the corridor cut into the cell, slicing through the stagnant, oppressive air. Two men stood there, one tall, one silent, both armed. Get up, the tall one commanded. They led him through a grim hallway lined with rusted doors. From within some cells came groan, from other, hushed whisper. He was pushed into a small room containing only a single table and two chairs. The bulbir was white and harsh, casting everything in sharp, unforgiving relief. The man who had spoken before closed the door and motioned for him to sit. Father Butro Anna, the man said, reading from a folder held in his hand. His Arabic was clean, educated. You've been in Libya for 8 years? Butro nodded. You studied in Rome. Another no. The man flipped a page, continuing, his tone almost conversational. You understand then, that this country is delicate. We have enemy everywhere, and face, especially your kind of face, can be used as a weapon. The second man stood rigidly in the corner, arms folded, his eyes hidden in shadow. He didn't move, didn't speak. The one at the table leaned forward. His beard was trimmed close, and a thin scar traced his left cheek like a cut that had never truly healed. Right. Yahem commanded Jalil, he said. You've caused me quite a lot of trouble, father. Butro offered no reply. His wrist still itched fiercely where the rope had burned them. Jalil opened the folder with air, spreading out several photographs. They were grainy, clearly taken through a telephoto lens, people entering the basement chapel, children, family and in one photo, the priest himself, arms raised mid-blessing. We watched you for weeks, Jalil said softly, almost contemplatively. You are careful, but not invisible. He picked up one photo and tapped it with his finger. This woman, Mariam, the old one who walks with a can. She has been with you every week. Butro nodded again, he sat tightening with a fresh wave of fear for his flock. Jalil studied him, his gaze piercing. Do you know what it looked like to outsider, to see people gâtés in secret, to whisper prayer to a foreign god, to receive money from Rome? We receive no money, Butro said quietly, his voice had a regret rasp. It was the first full sentence he had spoken in days. Jalil smiled, but it held no warmth. Then perhaps you trade in something more dangerous than money, ideas. He circled the tablons, slow, deliberate. You see, I've read the New Testament, he said suddenly, almost if out of ill curiosity. It speaks of peace, forgiveness, turning the other cheek. Beautiful word. But your followers, Father, they don't belong here anymore. They are relic of another empire. Butro lifted his gaze, meeting Jalil's eyes for the first time. My people were here long before empire. Fait has no border. That statement made Jalil pause. Something flickered behind this ardent expression, not agreement, not yet, but a fleeting recognition. He sat again. You believe that? Jalil asked. Yes. Even now, even after what you've seen within these walls? Butro exhaled slowly, profoundly. Especially after what you've seen. The younger man leaned back, his eyes narrowing, assessing. You think your God will protect you? No, Butro said. I think he is already here. For the first time, Jalil didn't respond immediately. The sterile room felt different, less like an interrogation, more like a strange test Netherman wanted to fail. Then the commandant abruptly stood. Take him back, he said, his voice flat. We'll talk again. The guard moved to says Butro, but Jalil stopped them for a heartbeat. He looked down at the old man, his expression measured, unreadable, and spoke softly, almost as if to himself. You pray for your people, he said. Perhaps one day you should pray for mine. Then he turned away. The door shut, the bulb made a ts monotonous song, and in that sterile, oppressive room, the first, almost imperceptible seed of mercy had been planted, deep in the heart of the man who thought himself beyond saving. The next morning if it was morning at all in that timeless prison lock turned again. Butro rose, his body ashing, expecting another round of relentless questions, perhaps another terrifying trip down that corridor of echo. But instead, a new prisoner stumbled through the door. He was all day, perhaps 70, his beard a startling white, like limestone dust. Ashes en shook from sheer exhaustion, but his eyes, too-tired, were steady, resolute. The guard shoved him forward, muttered something curt in Arabic, then slammed the door shut behind them. The old man cocked his balance and slowly surveyed the grim cell. When his gaze met Butro's, there was an immediate, unspoken recognition of face, but of soul that already understood the brutal nature of this place. My name is Gurges, the man said quietly, his Arabic tinged with gentle Egyptian vowel. They cooked me near the border. He was helping a family escape. Butro nodded, motioning for him to sit. I am a priest, he said softly. I know, Gurges whispered, lowering his frail body onto the filthy mat. They told me. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, yet it was not hostile. There was a profound comfort in the mere sound of another human breathing in the same crushing darkness. That night, when the footsteps finally faded and the building settled into a ts nightly rhythm of despair, Gurges spoke again. Do you think God can hear us here? Butro thought for a long, agonizing moment before answering, yes, Gurges. But perhaps he listened differently in place like this. The old man chuckled, a dry, hollow sound that seemed to scrape against the concrete walls. Then we should speak clearly, he replied. He reached for his pocket, only to realize it was empty, his rosary had been taken too. Butro lifted his hand, showing his open palm. We can count with our finger, he said. And so they began. The two men, seated side by side against the cold wall, prayed the rosary in hushed whisper. No bead, no candle, only memory. Gurgess recited verse from the Gospel of Mark. Butro followed with passage from John. Their word overlapped, sometimes blurred by fatigue, but each syllable filled the space like a fragile light pushing back against the encroaching mold. When exhaustion made them forget a line, they invented a new one, always ending with the same heartfelt refrain, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. The cell transformed after death, not in ETS smell or color, but in ETS very atmosphere. The air itself seemed to breathe with them. The bulb still burned, relentless, yet it no longer felt like torture, it became a vigil lamp, marking the hours of their unwavering faith. On what they guessed was their third night together, a faint, almost imperceptible sound drifted from the corridor, another prisoner, somewhere down the hall, repeating their prayer. Then another, far away, like ripple spreading from a stone dropped in dark, still water. They never saw those hidden voices, but they heard them, soft, trembling, defiant. It was enough. Gurgess looked at the priest and smiled, a fragile, exhausted smile. You see, father, he whispered. Even in prison, face multiply fasted and fear. Butro smiled back, his own lips cracked, but his eyes were now vividly alive. For the first time since his arrest, he felt something akin to hope the loud, triumphant kind, but the quiet, persist endurance that lives in whisper, in shared breath, in prayer counted on trembling finger. It happened after what they believed was the fifth dawn, to in that windowless world, dawn and dusk had long since merged into one endless, oppressive grey. The younger guard one who sometimes left a little extra water in their cup arrived earlier than usual. He slid the bread through the slot, hesitated for a moment, and then murmured something in Arabic, word short, hurried, and heavy with unspoken meaning. Then he walked away, leaving behind a chilling silence. Gurgess frowned, his lips moving silently as if replaying the sound, trying to decipher ETS chilling implication. When he finally looked up, his face had gone utterly pale. Dave set the date, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Butro didn't answer. The word in the staller, unreal, impossible. Sides Gurgess added, his voice cracking with raw emotion. Execution. No trial, no appeal. The priest closed his eyes for a long, silent moment. All sound receded, the incessant hum of the bulb, the faint groan from other cells, even his own frantic heartbeat. Only one thought remained, searing and absolute, Sides to die. He felt strangely calm at first, a detached acceptance. Then came the trembling, not from a fear of pain had witnessed pain before but from the sheer, brutal abruptness of it all. A life measure in baptism, wedding, funeral, confession, now brutally reduced to a countdown. He slumped back against the wall, his finger digging desperately into the rug concrete around him. The cell seemed to shrink, closing in, suffocating. Maybe, Gurgess said after a while, his voice a fragile thread, it will be quick. They said a bullet to the head. Ashie's voice broke, shattering on the last word. Butro looked at him, and for the first time, saw not just another prisoner, but a mirror. An old man, wrinkled, trembling, his eyes wet with unshed tears, no afraid of death itself, but of dying unseen, unmourned. That night, Gurgess cried openly, his sob and unashamed. The priest didn't try to stop him. Word of comfort felt hollow, dishonest in such a place. Sometimes the only truth was profound, shared silence. So he sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, letting the man's tranching sob echo against the unfeeling stone. Hours passed like that, in shared, wordless grief. Eventually, Gurgess's breathing slowed. He fell asleep, leaning heavily on Butro's arm, his face streaked with tears. The priest stared fixedly at the flickering bulb. How many men before him had done the same, watched that same light, waiting for the footstep that would cruelly end their lives? Et thought of his mother again. She had begged him, implored him, not to stay in Libya after the war began. Come home, she had pleaded. You can serve God anywhere. But he had believed, foolishly perhaps, that the shepherd must remain with his flock. Now that flock was gone, scattered, some alive, some gone. And he, the shepherd, was trapped in a pen of hungry wolves. He pressed his palm together, but no word came. Fate had never been a struggle of belief for him, it was always a struggle of endurance. But tonight, endurance felt like a betrayal. How could he possibly tell us had to trust when the world outside had transformed into a relentless furnace? He whispered finally, his voice cracking with the weight of his despair, why, Lord? Why here? Why now? The silence answered him, heavy and indifferent. Then from somewhere deep in his chest, another voice rose. Not tender, not divine, but small and unmistakably human, because even in darkness, light must have witness. He didn't know if it was a memory or a sudden, profound revelation. But the word steadied him, anchoring him. When morning came, or what passed for it in that endless grey, he told Gurgess. The old man smiled weakly, a ghost of his former self. Then we'll be the witness, he said. And so, together, they waited. The days that followed blurred into an indistinguishable cycle, bread, water, prayer, silence. At times, a profound calm descended, a strange, quiet acceptance that this was simply the final page of a long, unfolding book. At other times, terror descended like a sudden, violent storm, shaking his soul until even the rosary counted on his fingers felt utterly pointless. In those harrowing moments, Butro learned what it truly meant to surrender no a gesture of defeat, but an act of profound, unwavering faith. He stopped asking for deliverance, for escape. Instead, he began to ask for something simple, something more fundamental, courage. Not to avoid death, but to face it without losing the very part of him that still believed in mercy. And in that prayer, a small, almost invisible whisper of a prayer, something shifted in the air. The oppressive silence felt less empty. The agonizing waiting felt less cruel. Neither man knew it yet, but this was the night before the miracle would begin to stir. On what he believed to be the seventh day, Father Butro did something utterly unexpected. He asked to speak with commanded Jalil. The young guard with the soft eyes hesitated at the door, clearly surprised. The request was strange, unheard of. No prisoner, especially not one awaiting execution, ever asked to meet the man who held their sentence innocent. Yet something in the priest's voice calm, almost gentle made the guard know. He promised to deliver the message. Hours scrolled by. The hum of the bulb filled the silence like a constant reminder that time itself was ration, dwindling. Gurgess sat motionless, his lips moving through a prayer, neither of them quite finished. Then came the unmistakable sound of boots. The door opened, and Jalil appeared, framed by the harsh, unforgiving light of the corridor. His presence filled the cell, not with over violence, but with an indeniable aura of command. You asked for me, he stated, his voice de voix of emotion. Butro rose slowly, leaning on the wall for balance. You want to make a request, he said quietly. Jalil's brow drew together, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. A request? Yes. Before we die, he wished to celebrate one last mass. The word seemed to stun the air itself into silence. Even Gurgess stopped breathing, his eyes wide. Jalil stared at him, his expression unreadable. For what purpose? You think your God will change his mind about you? Butro shook his head slowly. No, commanded. He asked not for a miracle, only for permission to offer him what little he have left. For a long time, Jalil said nothing. He passed the cramped cell slowly, his heavy boots echoing loudly against the concrete. The guard at the door shifted uncomfortably. Finally, the commandant stopped. You will have no sacred wine, no altar. You will use what he give you, bread, water, nothing more. That is enough, Butro said, a profound certainty in his voice. Jalil studied him again, longed this time. À fin, almost imperceptible curiosity flickered in his eyes, real and undeniable. You will do it here, in this cell. He will allow it, do you want to see it for myself? Gurgess gasped softly. The idea of the commande watching felt almost blasphemous, yet the priest nodded with quiet gratitude. Tomorrow, Jalil said, his voice firm, at noon. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway, his voice softening for just a fleeting moment. Why do you want this, father? You could use your final hours to rest. Butro meis gaz, his eyes unwavering. Because a mass is not about death, commandé. It's about remembering what came after it. Jalil's face tightened. Something flickered there, a thought quickly buried. He gave a short, brusque no, then stepped out. The heavy door closed with a decisive click. When the footstep finally faded, Gurgess spoke in a hoarse whisper. Do you think he'll truly let us? He will, Butro said, a strange certainty in his voice. He doesn't know it yet, but he already has. That night, neither man slept. They whispered through the sequence of the liturgy, rehearsing the ancient word if they were soldiers polishing armor for a battle they would not survive. Outside the cell, the wind howled through broken windows, a mournful lamb. Inside, the two men prepared for the impossible, utterly an hour that heaven itself was already listening. Morning arrived without sunrise. In that windowless prison, they announced itself only by the muted shuffle of boots, the ominous clatter of keys, the brief, harsh surge of voices before a heavy silence reclaimed the hall. Butro and Gurgess knelt side by side, their body ashing, yet their hearts beat with an odd, profound calm, like the stillness just before a great storm. They had spent the entire night whispering the order of the Mass, recalling every word, every sacred gesture from memory alone. Around mid-morning, heavy footsteps stopped directly outside their cell. The door opened, and Jalil appeared. He was not alone. Two guards followed, rifles held ready, their face grim. Innocent, the commandé held a small paper bag. He placed it on the floor between them with an unexpected, almost gentle care. Inside were two round pieces of pita bread, still warm to the touch, and a sealed bottle of water. Your material, he said, his voice neutral, de voix of emotion. Butro bowed his head slightly. Thank you, commandé. You have 2 hours, Jalil added, his eyes blinking. After that, you return to waiting. The guard stepped back, taking their position in the doorway, their rifle still. The cell had never felt so utterly silent. Even the hum of the light seemed to fade, holding a ts breath. Butro carefully spread a scrap of cloth on the floor. Some worn piece Gurgess had lovingly preserved, washed, and folded if it were a precious relic. Upon it, he placed 1 piece of bread and poured some water into a tin cup. There was no vestment, no chalice, no altar. Yet in that moment, the very walls themselves seemed to bend and war, if creation itself was watching with bated breath. He began, his voice clear and resonant, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. His voice echoed against the concrete. Gurgess responded softly, trembling but clear, his own voice a fin counterpoint. The guard exchanged an easy glance but remained silent. Each prayer, each gesture now carried the unbearable weight of finality. When Butro reached the liturgy of the word, he spoke from memory, his voice unwavering, blessed are the Purinat, for they shall see God. The word hung in the air, fragile yet profoundly defiant. I continued, a subtle, almost imperceptible change began to unfold. At first it was faint, the air thickened, as if Someone had turned up the very gravity of the room. Then came the light. The naked bulb above them, harsh and yellow for days, softened, transforming into a warm, ethereal glow. The oppressive shadow melted from the corner of the cell. When Butro lifted the bread in his hand, something extraordinary happened. It shimmered. Not a mere reflection, not a trick of light, but en actual radiance, soft and golden, pulsing gently like the very heartbeat of the world. Gurgess gasped, his hand flying to his mouth in astonishment. one of the gar stumbled backward, nutrine a cure cinder is brice. The other instinctively raised his rifle, un sur what impossible thing échoue des mat. Butro froze, his own en trembling incontrollably. He could feel the warmth of the bread, not hot, not burning, but alive. He whispered the ancient word that had marked 2 ans of mass before, take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body. I spoke, the light deepened, intensifying. The bread glowed brighter, a golden white, illuminating the cell like a sudden, impossible dawn. The gar stared, wide-eyed, their face reflected in the otherworldly shimmer. And then came the second sign. Butro lifted the tin cup filled with water. Achilles' voice shook now, but the sacred word still flowed, unbroken, take this, all of you, and drink from it. For this is the chalice of my blood. Before the sentence was even complete, the clear water turned crimson gradually, but instantly, violently, if the color had been hiding there all along, simply waiting for this moment to reveal itself. Gurgés cried out, falling to his knees, his face buried in his. The younger guard stumbled backward again, colliding with the wall, whispering, his voice raw with terror, it's blood. It's blood. Butro stared at the cup. The surface of the liquid caught the golden glow of the bread, reflecting it a deep, living red. And then a sang, at first faint like a distant memory, then overwhelming, rose. The unmistakable, intoxicating fragrance of fresh rose filled a place that had never known beauty, only despair. It spread through the air, through the corridor, through the very crack in the walls. From other cells, confused, astonished voices began to rise. What is that smell? Someone shouted, his voice laced with fear. Do you smell it, too? Another cried in Arabic. The gar, utterly bewildered, looked to Jalil. The commander stood frozen at the threshold, his eyes wide, disbelieving. The scar on his cheek seemed too pale, fading into the newfound light. He took one hesitant step inside, then another, drawn by an irresistible force. The sang grew stronger, almost tangible, wrapping around him. Achilles' gaze fell upon the bread, still glowing impossibly, and then on the crimson cup trembling in the priestess' hand. He didn't speak, didn't move, only stared like a man watching the very sky break open before him. Butro could hardly breathe. Achilles' voice came out a fragile whisper, this is my body. This is my blood. The golden light pulsed once more, if acknowledging the profound word, then steadied soft, living, eternal. The gar slowly lowered their rifle. No one dared to move. Gurgés pressed his forehead to the floor, tears streaking his face, whispering ancient prayer in Coptic. And in that narrow cell, illuminated by nothing more than bread, wine, and an unshakable face, the line between heaven and earth simply vanished. No thunder, no explosion, juste profound silence, and the sound of rose lingerie, indeniable proof that God had entered a place men believed they would never, could never, come. For a long, breathtaking moment, no one spoke. The bread glowed softly in the priestess' trembling hand, and the air shimmered with a fragrance that utterly did not belong to this world. Then something broke inside the silence, a sound that wasn't a kit a sob, but wasn't a commanded air. It came from Jalil. He stepped forward slowly, his boots scraping softly against the concrete. Achilles' eyes, once sharp and cold, were now wide with something entirely new, terror, awe, and an agonizing longing, all intertwined. He knelt. It happened so quietly that the gar, still stunned, didn't notice at first. The commander, the man who had ordered this execution, was on his knees before an old priest and a piece of impossibly glowing bread. He began to speak, his voice shaking, words spilling like water through broken stone. He have killed, he whispered, his voice shocked. Too many. Too easily. He pressed a trembling hand to his face, if ashamed to let the very air hear him. He have torture. Order execution. He believed he was defending my people, my face. But he was only defending myself. My power. My fear. Tears slipped down the lines of dust on his cheek. Gurgés looked up, stunned, still kneeling in silent prayer. The gar shifted uneasily, un sur Weder tout intervenait or tout joint him. Butro gently lowered the shining bread. God does not despise a contrite at he said quietly, his voice imbued with boundless compassion. Jaliles shoulder shook violently. He don't deserve forgiveness. None of us do, Butro replied, his gaze steady. That is why grace exists. The commander looked up, truly looked, and for the first time since his birth, perhaps saw something other than violence reflected in another man's eyes. One of the guard, a younger man with a faint scar above his eyebrow, began to cry. He sank to his knees well, he said bowed in profound humility. Another followed. Within seconds, the narrow corridor outside filled with the resonant sound of knees striking the floor, one after another, in an unspoken cascade of repentance. Men who had carried rifle, men who had executed prisoners without trial, men who had long forgotten how to pray, all of them bowed toward that ethereal light. Butro broke the glowing bread. Each fragment radiated light as if a tiny sun lived within it. He handed a piece to Gurges, who received it weeping, and then extended another toward Jalil. The commander recoiled at first. No, he whispered, his voice raw. Not me. I am unworthy. You are breeding, Butro replied, his voice gentle but firm. That is proof enough that God hasn't given upon you. Jalil hesitated, then extended his trembling hand. The piece of bread rested there, warm, radiant, alive. He held it to his chest, sobbing openly now, his rigid posture utterly broken. And then something even stranger began to happen. One by one, the men who had received the glowing bread began to radiate the same light, faint at first, then growing stronger, more profound. It was not harsh, not blinding, only pure, gentle, golden. It shone through their chest as though their very hearts had caught fire with divine grace. The entire hallway was now bathed in that incandescent light, shimmering against the steel doors, against the damp, scarred walls, against the rusted bolt. The priest could hardly see for the tears blurring his own eyes. He lifted the crimson cup, still trembling. This is the blood that was shed for you, he said. They passed it among themselves, guards, prisoners, commanded Alik. Each drank reverently, with a stillness that spoke of how, as if they were tasting something infinite, eternal. And then the sound came, a metallic click, then another, and another. Every single cell door along the corridor began to unlock, no kicked open, not forced, but unlocked cleanly, calmly, one after another, a tug invisible and turned every key at once. The sound echoed like distant, ethereal bell. A few guards gasped and fell to the ground, covering their face in shock. Others looked toward Jalil, expecting order, but none came. The commander only stared at the now open doors, his face illuminated by the golden glow, tears streaming unchecked down his cheek. From inside those cells, prisoners began to emerge, weak, blinking against the gentle light, their chin clattering softly, hesitantly. Among them came Mariam, bruised but alive, Isef, limping but smiling through tears, the Mansour family, their children clutching one another in disbelief, their eyes wide with wonder. When they saw Butro, they instinctively dropped to their knees. The priest could not speak. He could only lift the now dimming bread and whisper, his voice thick with emotion, "Behold what love has done." No one moved to flee. No one shouted. The silence that followed was not fear, it was profound reverence. The glow lingered, fading slowly until the light of the arch bulb above seemed pale and insignificant by comparison. The scent of rose still filled the air, sweeter now, more subtle, as if heaven were exhaling after holding a TS breath in profound witness. Jalil rose to his feet, wiping his face with a trembling hand. His voice trembled, stripped of all command, ruined human. "I cannot execute you," he said simply. "I cannot keep any of you here." He looked around, a tug searching for someone to contradict him. No one did. He turned to Butro, his gaze filled with a desperate plea. "You will go free. All of you. Leave tonight, before the other come." And I spoke those words, it was as if the chain that bound not only the prisoner, but his own tormented soul, finally fell away. They left before sunset. The Erutsid felt alien, too wide, too clean, after 11 days of recycled breeze and concrete dust. When the heavy door of the detention compound opened, the light struck their face like baptismal water. Some wept openly, uncontrollably, others simply stood frozen, unable to believe that the vast, open sky still existed. The courtyard was almost empty. A few guards watched from a distance, head bowed, unsure whether they were witnessing rebellion or revelation. Jalil stood near the gate, his hand trembling and fumbled with a ring of keys. He looked smaller now, diminished, as if something inside him had been burned away, leaving only the vulnerable human beneath the uniform. He gestured toward a white Toyota parked by the Ute Sam truck that had carried Father Butro blindfolded into captivity. Take it, he said, his voice hoarse. It's fueled. It will get you to the border. Butro stepped forward, the desert wind tugging at his tattered cassock. Commanded Jalil's eyes lifted, glistening in the last, golden light of the day. You don't need to thank me, he said softly, almost painfully. I am the one who should beg forgiveness. You already have, Butro replied, his voice a gentle balm. A silence passed between them, two men who had started a bitter enemy, now bound by something neither could explain, only deeply feel. Jalil reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper stamped with his own official seal. This will get you through the checkpoint. He wrote that you are humanitarian workers, not prisoners. Show it and keep moving. Do not stop until Tunisia. He pressed the document into the priestess' hand, their fingers touching for just a second. It felt like an oath, a sacred promise. When Butro looked up again, the commander's eyes had filled with fresh tears. Tell your God, he began, then stopped, a profound shift in his voice. No, tell him nothing. He already knows. The priest nodded, unable to speak past the limpinistroa. The freed prisoner gathered by the truck, 18 Soulinol, cramped into a vehicle built for 8. The Mansour children clung to one another, whispering fragments of prayer they barely understood, their eyes still wide with the day's wonder. Mariam, leaning on his FS arm, looked up at the vast, darkening sky, her lips moving silently, thank you. As they rolled towards the open gate, the sun began a TS final descent, a spectacular blaze of orange and red, spilling color across the endless sand. The air smelled faintly of rose, still faint now, like the fading, cherished memory of a powerful dream. At the edge of the yard, Jalil watched them go. H.I.S. rifle loosely at his side, utterly forgotten. The dying light caught the scar on his cheek, turning it to a thin, silver line. For a long, profound time, he didn't move. Then he whispered to the anti-air, his voice barely audible, if this is mercy, then let me learn it. The truck disappeared down the dirt road, kicking up a trail of dust that glowed gold in the dying sun. And somewhere above that desolate stretch of desert, where violence had reigned for years, peace hovered, fragile, brief, but undeniably, powerfully real. They crossed the Tunisian border at dawn. The sky was pale and silver, like the world itself was taking a TS first, deep breath after holding it for far too long. The Tunisian officer barely asked questions. One man, all day, with thick glass and gentle eyes, looked over Jalil's paper, stamped it without hesitation, and said simply, welcome. For the first time in 11 agonizing days, the word freedom meant something tangible, something real. They were taken to a parish house outside Tunis, a modest two-story building run by Father Antoine, a quiet, patient priest whose understanding seemed endless. He gave them bed, food, and something infinitely rare, silence without fear. Butro could not sleep for night. He would wake, drenched in cold sweat, convinced he was still in that glowing cell, that the bread was still shining, impossibly, innocent. Gurges suffered worse. The old man screamed in his sleep, clawing at the air, begging unseen an ode to drag him away again. And yet, every morning, the same faint, sweet smell returned, rose. It came and went without explanation, lingering like a memory too stubborn to die. Weeks passed. Slowly, the body began to heal, but the soul, burdened by such profound trauma, lagged behind. Then came the world, knocking once more. A journalist from Italy, Marco De Rossi, appeared at the rectory one afternoon. E other rumors whisper of a priest and 17 other released from a Libyan militia after a miraculous event. At first, Butro refused. He didn't want the sacred, the deeply personal, turned into a mere spectacle. But Gurgess reminded him softly, his voice weary but firm, Father, if we remain silent, who will testify that it truly happened? So, they spoke. Marco listened for hours, his recorded whirring softly, a Butro described the arrest, the suffocating cell, the miraculous mass, the impossible light. When he asked about the bread and the water, skepticism flickered briefly in the journalist's eyes, a professional do, but he kept writing, meticulously. The story ran 2 weeks later in a prominent Italian Catholic newspaper. By the next morning, Butro's inbox was overflowing. Letters poured in from believer, from skeptic, from everything in between. Some called him a saint, others outright called him a liar. He didn't answer any of them, he simply prayed that the truth, in ETS own time and way, would find ETS pass. Then the Vatican called. A formal investigation was opened not to celebrate, but to verify, to scrutinize. 2 seasoned theologians and a psychologist arrived in Tunis to interview every survivor separately. They compare testimony, checked for inconsistency, meticulously examined their mental states. It was utterly exhausting. At times, Butro felt less like a humble witness and more like a defendant on trial for the audacious act of believing his own eyes. After 3 arduous months, the report was finished. The conclusion, no evidence of deception, testimony remarkably consist. However, insufficient physical proof to déclarer en official miracle. The verdict didn't surprise him. Miracle, et realized, were never truly meant for bureaucracy. Still, the investigation brought something utterly unexpected. One morning, a letter arrived, smuggled from Libya through the of anonymous sympathiser and brave, quiet traitor. It was from Jalil. The handwriting was careful, uncertain, a 2 each word was being relearned, each stroke a conscious effort. Father, the letter began, since the night you left, I have not returned to the prison. I burned my uniform and the insignia that gave me power. My men think I am mad. Maybe I am. But I know what I saw. The light was real. The bread was real. The roses were real. I remember how it felt. The immense weight lifting off my chest after years of killing in God's name. That night I understood that God had never asked me to kill for him, only to forgive in his place. I left the militia. I live now in a small house near Misrata. I have a Bible hidden in Arabic translation. I read it in secret, 2 each page feel like a confession, a prayer of contrition. I am not yet a Christian. I do not deserve that name. But I have begun to pray. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I still see the light in that cell, and hear your voice, Father, saying, you are breathing. That is proof enough that God hasn't given upon you. Tell the other I am trying to become the man I should have been. If they ever call this event a miracle, remember perhaps it was not meant for you, but for me. The paper smelled faintly of smoke and desert dust. Butro read it 3 times before folding it carefully, reverently, placing it between the page of his worn Bible. He didn't cry. He simply whispered, then it was worth everything. When he showed the letter to Father Antoine, the keen Tunisian priest smiled sadly, profoundly. You see, my friend, he said, his voice soft. The Vatican may not have confirmed your miracle, but heaven already did. That night, the rose returned, stronger this time, filling every room of the parish house until the youngest of the Mansour children woke and whispered, half asleep, she's here again. Butro didn't answer. He just closed his eyes and breathed in the sun, soft, forgiving, eternal. Years passed. The world moved on, it always does. Wars shifted, government fell, and new tyrann rose to replace the whole. But in a quiet parish house on the tranquil outskirts of Tunis, a priest with graying hair and a calm, knowing voice continued to celebrate mass every morning, faithful, steady, utterly invisible to the roaring noise of history. Father Butro Anna had grown older, slower, his step more deliberate. HIS en some team trembled now when he lifted the chalice. Yet every time he reached the hallowed word, this is my body, he felt it, the powerful memory, not of light or rose, but of a profound presence that needed no further proof. He had not seen bread shine again. He had not watched water turn red, and still, he believed just as fiercely as he had that night in the cell. Perhaps even more so, because he had come to understand something deeper, miracles are not meant to erase face, they are meant to teach it how to survive without them. He kept the letter from Jalil, now fragile and faded, folded between the pages of his Bible. Over the years, 2 more letters arrived. In the last one, who written in une veine Arabic, the former commandé spoke of his baptism. He had found a secret priest who risked everything to pour a few drops of water over his head, whispering the word that sealed a lifetime of violence inside an embrace of forgiveness. When the water touched my skin, Jalil wrote, his word halting but sincere, he smelt rose again. Father Butro cried that night, no tears of grief, but of profound awe. He had once thought the miracle was the light in the cell, the physical manifestation. Now he knew the true miracle had always been the light kindled inside a man like Jalil, kind of man the world had already condemned, the kind of soul most believed beyond saving. Gurgess lived 3 more years after their release. Before his peaceful death, he told Butro, he think God showed us even early, Father, so that when we finally face him again, we'll recognize the sang. When the old man passed away, his very last word were, he can smell the rose. The Mansour family eventually resettled in France. The children grew up, thrived, became teacher, doctor, parents. They wrote some team, their letters always ending with the same poignant line, fate multiply faster than fear. And Isef, the medical student who once shook too badly to hold a scalpel, became a gifted surgeon. He told Father Butro that every time he saved a life, he feel like he is still standing in that glowing cell, watching life triumph over death. Now in his 60s, Father Butro often sat by the small window of the parish house as the Tunisian sun dipped gracefully below the rooftop. He would think of Libya, not with anger, not even with sorrow, but with a deep, abiding gratitude. It was the place where he had learned that Goddess Grace doesn't avoid the darkest corner of the world, it invade them, transform them. Some team visitor came, journalist, pilgrim, skeptic seeking proof. They wanted to see the man who saw a miracle. He always smiled gently and said the same profound thing. No, my friend, he only witnessed what others could not see. The miracle was not mean. It was HIS. And then he would lead them to the Quai Chapel where the Hersty carried a faim, unexplainable sweetness. There, he would celebrate Mass always, bread, wine, silence, no lights, no rose, only faith pure and unadulterated. In his final homily, he began to tell his parishioners a simple, profound truth, God does not perform miracles to prove himself. He performed them to remain us is still near. But when the rose fade and the lights go out, faith must take their place. When he finished speaking, people often cried, some because they believed with all their hearts, others because they desperately wanted to. And as the years drew to a close, Father Butro stopped asking for signs. He had seen enough. He knew that even some team tears the veille just once, and that single, sacred glimpse must sustain us for a lifetime. On his final night, I drifted toward sleep, witness said he whispered 3 words, he smelled rose and then, simply, peace. No thunder, no angels. Just the quai, unwavering certainty of a soul that had once touched eternity and carried its precious memory humbly through the rest of his extraordinary days.